Midnight, Mississippi, 1857. The moon spills through broken shutters, slicing the dark into silver fragments. A chain rattles once, then stills. The air is heavy with the musk of rot and damp cotton. A lullaby drifts, thin, ghostly, sung by no living voice. Footsteps scrape across the dirt floor. A shadow glides, stops, listens. Silence. Then a whisper carried on the wind. They never left. The walls breathe. The ground remembers. Bloodstains that never dried seep upward like fresh wounds. The night holds its breath. The story begins where screams once ended. The sun bled red across the cotton fields, its light swallowed by haze and humidity. The plantation stretched like a wound carved into Mississippi's earth. Cotton stalks bent under the weight of their boles, white against soil dark as dried blood. The air smelled of molasses, sweat, and iron, the scent of toil and punishment. Cicadas screamed in the distance, their song carrying over the crack of a whip echoing faint from the far rows. A boy leaned against a fence post, slingshot dangling from his hand. His name was Silas Green, overseer's son, 17, pale eyes, sharp with cruelty disguised as curiosity. He spat into the dirt, watching the enslaved bend and pull, the rhythm of survival etched into their bodies. "Pa says they ain't got souls," Silas muttered, chewing on a splinter of wood. "But I reckon they bleed enough to prove otherwise." Beside him shuffled an old woman, her back curved like a broken branch, hair gone silver. Her name was Martha Joe, known across the quarters as the listener. She rarely spoke, but she hummed. Lullabies when the sun went down, melodies that carried sorrow as deep as scripture. Silas eyed her warily. "Don't hum at me, witch," he snapped. Her eyes lifted, milky with age. She said nothing. Instead, a tune slipped between her lips, soft, haunting, as though meant for ears long buried. Silas flinched. He hurled a pebble at her feet. "Shut it!" The tune stopped, but in the silence that followed, the cicadas stilled, as if even the fields listened. Whispers traveled fast across the plantation. Men in chains spoke in low tones by the water trough. Children pressed ears against floorboards at night. The tale was always the same. The quarters were haunted. They said at midnight screams clawed from the earth. They said chains rattled without hands. They said the walls wept. Silas scoffed whenever he heard it. "Fools scare themselves with shadows," he told his friends. Yet each night, as he passed the row of abandoned shacks at the far edge of the land, his steps quickened. Martha Joe walked, slower there. Her fingers brushed the rough wood of the nearest wall as if greeting an old friend. "They ain't gone," she whispered once when no overseer stood near. "Souls don't leave easy when they've been chained." Her words sank into the dusk, unheard by most, but not by Isaiah Turner, the boy with the scar on his cheek, who lingered nearby with his brother. His small hand clenched a broken chain link hidden in his pocket. He heard Martha Joe's lullaby float, soft as breath, and he felt the air thicken. The plantation house loomed above the fields, columns whitewashed, windows glowing with lamplight. Inside, glasses clinked and laughter spilled, blind to the murmurs rising outside. But in the shacks, those rotting wooden shells where the enslaved lay crowded on straw, the whispers grew louder each night. Whispers of fire, whispers of blood, whispers that the quarters remembered and the quarters were waiting. The night wrapped itself around the quarters like a shroud. A thin candle flickered in the corner, its wax dripping onto the dirt floor. Isaiah Turner sat cross-legged on a straw mat, fingers curled tight around a broken chain link no longer than his thumb. He was 12, wiry and sharp-eyed, the scar on his cheek a reminder of the day he had refused to bow his head. His older brother, Elijah Turner, crouched beside him, carving a piece of wood with a pocket knife dulled by time and use. Elijah was 19, shoulders strong from the fields, eyes burning with a restless fire. He flicked shavings into the dirt, the rhythm steady like a heartbeat. You hold that thing like it's gold, Elijah muttered, glancing at Isaiah's hand. It is, Isaiah answered, voice barely above a whisper. It's proof. Proof. Of what? That chains can break. Elijah smirked, though the scarred lines across his back betrayed how costly that truth was. He tapped the knife against his palm. Chains break easy. Men don't. We're still here. From the far end of the shack, a voice rose in song. Ruth Ann, 16, sat with her knees drawn to her chest, a silver locket clutched in her hand. Her voice carried, low and trembling, filling the air with a lullaby. She sang of rivers and trees, of mothers lost to the auction block, of nights when the stars seemed like open doors. Isaiah leaned into the sound, eyes closing. Mama used to sing that, he whispered. Ruth Ann opened the locket, revealing a faded picture of her mother. She told me to keep singing. Said one day, someone would hear. Elijah set down the knife, his jaw tightening. Singing won't save us, steel will. Ruth Ann's gaze sharpened. And you think knives will stop the whip? They might, Elijah replied. Or they might just remind them we're not cattle. The candle flickered, shadows dancing across their faces. Isaiah studied them both, torn between Ruth Ann's voice that soothed and Elijah's fire that seared. The lullaby lingered, settling into his bones like memory carved in stone. The door creaked. Martha Jo stepped in, silent as dusk. She nodded to the children, her hum weaving with Ruth Ann's song. Elijah bowed his head slightly, a rare show of respect. They took her today, Isaiah murmured suddenly. His words hung heavy. There, Mother had been sold, marched away with a line of others bound for Louisiana. He had watched until the cart disappeared in dust. Elijah's fists clenched. He drove the knife into the dirt floor. I'll never forgive. Never. Ruth Ann's voice cracked, the song breaking like glass. She clutched the locket to her chest. Outside, the cicadas wailed, and the overseer's lantern bobbed in the distance. But inside the shack, 3 young souls sat together. One holding a broken chain, one clutching a silver locket, one gripping a worn knife. Symbols of defiance, of memory, of fire. And all 3 swore silently that nothing would remain as it was. The barn smelled of hay, leather, and ink. A lone lantern swayed from a beam, its glow spilling across dust and shadow. Isaiah Turner crouched in the corner, lips moving silently as his eyes traced crude letters scrawled into the dirt. His tongue pressed against his teeth as he mouthed the shapes. Careful, a voice whispered. Don't let your mouth move. Readings in the eyes, not the tongue. The figure stepped closer. Jonah Miller, son of the plantation preacher, 20 years old, his hands perpetually stained with ink, crouched beside Isaiah. His pale fingers traced the letter A with the blunt end of a quill. Like this, Jonah murmured. See? Quiet as prayer. Isaiah squinted. But prayers you say out loud. Jonah smiled faintly. Not the best ones. The boy's scarred cheek shone in the lantern light. He etched the letter again, firmer this time. Jonah leaned back, listening to the night. If anyone knew I was teaching you this, he shook his head. They'd hang me beside you. Then why do it? Isaiah asked. Jonah hesitated, then whispered, because a cage is worse when you don't know the word for it. The barn door groaned. Elijah slipped inside, his knife at his hip. His eyes narrowed at Jonah. You shouldn't be here. Jonah stiffened. Neither should you. Elijah's voice cut sharp. You play savior in the dark, but daylight makes you blind like the rest. Isaiah looked between them. Jonah's face flushed, but he said nothing. Elijah dragged his brother. Up, Sam, come on, we've got work that matters. Outside, the air was thick with honeysuckle and the low hum of crickets. Elijah guided Isaiah along the dirt path toward the quarters. His jaw was tight. You think he cares? Elijah asked. You think ink will cut chains? Isaiah whispered. He's trying. Trying don't keep you alive, Elijah snapped. From the shadows of the main house balcony, laughter floated. A girl's voice, clear as bells. Elijah's head lifted. A red ribbon fluttered in the breeze. Sarah Bellamy, 18, the planter's daughter, leaned against the rail. Her hair caught the lantern light, tied back with her mother's ribbon. She whispered his name like a secret prayer. Elijah. He froze. Isaiah tugged his sleeve. Don't. But Elijah's feet betrayed him, pulling him toward her. Later that night, at the edge of the garden, Sarah slipped from the house barefoot. She carried the scent of lilacs, her white dress trailing. Elijah waited, his body tense. You shouldn't be here, he muttered. Neither should you, she answered, smiling softly. Her hand reached for his, pale fingers trembling as they touched his calloused skin. For a moment, the chains of the world seemed to fall away. They'd kill you, Elijah whispered. They'd kill us both, Sarah said, defiant. But what's life without choice? Their lips met, desperate and forbidden. A kiss in the shadows, against every law carved, into Mississippi soil. From behind the trees, Isaiah watched, torn between awe and fear. He heard Ruth Ann's song drifting from the quarters, a lullaby that sounded like warning. Days turned to weeks. Sarah left secret notes tucked into the hollow of a tree, tied with the same red ribbon. Elijah carried them close, fire smoldering in his chest. One evening, Jonah cornered Isaiah outside the barn. His ink-stained hands shook. Your brother's playing with fire. Isaiah's eyes narrowed. He's in love. Love? Jonah's voice broke into a harsh laugh. Love gets men killed. Love gets families whipped. Love costs blood. Isaiah's heart pounded. Jonah leaned closer, his whisper fevered. Freedom will come, but not through kisses. Remember that, Isaiah. Remember it when the blood starts to spill. The boy said nothing, but his fingers closed around the broken chain link in his pocket. The night pressed heavy, full of promises and threats that neither words nor kisses could erase. The day began heavy with heat, the kind that pressed against the chest and stole the breath. The quarters stirred restless. Whispers of a ribbon discovered in Elijah's pocket spread like fire through dry grass. By noon, the enslaved were herded to the center of the yard. Dust swirled as boots trampled the earth. Overseer Thomas Calhoun stood at the front, a flask dangling from his hand. His face was ruddy from drink, his eyes mean as a cornered dog. He smacked the flask against his thigh, the rhythm sharp and cruel. Elijah Turner, he barked, his voice carrying over the fields. Step forward. Elijah stood tall, shoulders squared, though ropes bound his wrists. Isaiah fought against, the hands that held him back, his chain link biting into his palm. Ruth Ann pressed a trembling hand against her locket, whispering a prayer under her breath. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, locked behind the windows of the great house. Yet her ribbon was clutched in Calhoun's fist, scarlet against his calloused skin. You think yourself a man? Calhoun sneered. Think you can put your filthy hands on a lady? Elijah's jaw tightened. He spat into the dust. I am a man. More than you'll ever be. Gasps rippled through the gathered crowd. Calhoun's face darkened. He ripped the flask from his hip, splashing whiskey across Elijah's chest. The scent filled the air, sharp, burning. You'll learn, Calhoun hissed. He snapped the whip from his belt, the leather coiling like a serpent. The first crack split the air. Elijah's body jerked, but no sound left his throat. The second fell, and the third. Flesh tore. Blood beaded and ran. The quarters echoed with the sound, each lash a drumbeat of cruelty. Isaiah screamed, "Stop, stop it!" But the men held him firm. Martha Jo closed her eyes, humming low, a lullaby swallowed by the cracks of the whip. After the 10th strike, Elijah raised his head. His face was pale, blood streaking his back, but his eyes still burned. He locked his gaze on Calhoun. You can break my skin, he rasped, but you'll never break me. Calhoun froze, whip dangling. For a moment, the yard held its breath. Then he leaned close, his words dripping venom. Love don't grow in chains. He hurled the ribbon into the fire pit, the scarlet fabric curling black in the flames. Elijah watched it burn, his jaw clenched against pain, his fists bound but trembling with fury. Isaiah's chest heaved, the broken chain link cutting deeper into his palm until blood slicked his skin. Ruth Ann's lullaby swelled louder, her voice shaking but unbroken, carrying through the silence like defiance itself. The crowd of enslaved stood frozen, eyes wide, breaths held. Some turned away, unable to watch. Others stared, a spark of something, dangerous flickering behind their fear. When it ended, Elijah collapsed onto the dirt. The overseer tossed the whip aside and staggered back to his flask. The yard was silent but for the ragged breathing of the broken and the murmurs of the witnesses. From the balcony, Sarah's pale face appeared for a heartbeat, her hands pressed against the glass. She vanished as quickly as she had come. Isaiah knelt beside his brother, whispering fiercely, "We'll make them pay." Elijah coughed, blood on his lips, and gripped Isaiah's hand. His eyes burned with promise. And in that silence, in the ashes of the ribbon and the stink of spilled whiskey, the seeds of rebellion rooted deep. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, purple and bruised against the setting sun. Inside the cramped quarters, whispers rose like sparks. Elijah lay on his stomach, wounds still raw, while Isaiah knelt at his side. Ruth Ann dabbed blood away with strips of cloth torn from her skirt. Elijah winced, but his voice was steady. No more waiting, no more songs to cover their screams. We strike. Ruth Ann's hand trembled on the cloth. Strike? With what? With whatever we can forge. The door creaked open. A tall man stepped inside, shoulders broad, 2 fingers missing from his left hand. Hector Jones, the blacksmith, smelled of soot and iron. He set a wrapped bundle on the dirt floor. Knives glinted in the candlelight, rough but sharp. "I've been working in secret," Hector said quietly. "Tools, not toys, but tools can cut more than wood." Behind him came Mary Ellen, the midwife, her pouches of dried roots rattling at her hip. Her hand smelled of sage and smoke. "Steel cuts," she said, kneeling beside Elijah. "But so does poison." She unwrapped bundles of herbs and powders, their scents sharp and bitter. One pinch in his whiskey, and Thomas Calhoun won't rise from his bed. Elijah's eyes burned. Good. He'll choke on his own cruelty. From the shadows, a man crossed himself. Daniel Ross, field hand, his wooden cross swinging against his chest. His face was pale, his lips trembling. "God will punish them," Daniel muttered. "Not us, not our hands." Elijah turned, voice like iron. "God's been silent too long. If he won't punish them, then we must." Isaiah leaned forward, chain link clenched in his palm. "We can do this. We have to." The plan formed in murmurs. Mary Ellen would slip poison into Calhoun's flask. Hector's knives would be hidden in baskets carried from the smithy. Ruth Ann would sing to mask movements, her lullabies a code of warning. But danger pressed close. Twice that week, their secrets nearly broke. One night, Thomas stumbled into the quarters, whiskey thick on his breath. His eyes narrowed at Isaiah, who sat carving letters into wood. "What's that, boy?" Isaiah's throat tightened. He covered the carving with his hand. "Just scrap, sir." Thomas snatched the wood, his brow furrowed at the crude marks. Then he laughed, tossing it aside. "Can't read scratches, neither can you." He staggered out, the flask sloshing at his hip. Isaiah's heart pounded until the door shut. Another time, Mary Ellen's pouch spilled before a patroller's boots, bitter herbs scattered across the dirt. The man sniffed. "What's this filth?" "Medicine," she answered calmly, gathering them with steady hands. "For birthing," he spat, muttering about witchcraft, but moved on. Only when he vanished did Mary Ellen exhale, her hands trembling. At night, thunder rolled. Ruth Ann's voice wove through the quarters, her lullaby bending into a signal, high notes for danger, low for safety. Children listened wide-eyed, not knowing the code their parents whispered. Elijah's voice cut through the storm. When the night is darkest, we rise, fire for fire, blood for blood. And in the hush that followed, no one dared speak against him. The storm broke at midnight. Rain hammered the roofs, thunder split the sky, and lightning flared over the fields. In the quarters, breath held still. Every sound felt louder, the drip of water through the rafters, the rasp of knives sliding from their wrappings, the hum of Ruth Ann's voice carrying steady through the dark. Elijah pushed himself upright, his wounds bound, his face pale, but fierce. "Tonight," he whispered. "Tonight, the chains answer back." Isaiah clutched his broken chain link, knuckles white. Hector tested the edge of a knife against his thumb. Mary Ellen measured powders into a small cloth packet, her eyes cold as stone. Daniel Ross muttered prayers, fingers digging into his cross until the wood cracked. Outside, Calhoun's lantern bobbed across the yard. His flask swung heavy at his hip, sloshing with whiskey. Mary Ellen slipped into the shadows, feet silent in the mud. When she returned, the flask was lighter, its contents darkened with powder. She nodded once. "God forgive me," Daniel breathed. Elijah's eyes hardened. "God has no place here." They moved like shadows. Hector led 2 men to the smithy, blades hidden in sacks of tools. Ruth Ann lingered near the overseer's cabin, her song rising soft but steady. Lightning flashed. Her face, pale, her locket gleaming like a beacon. Inside the cabin, Calhoun tipped the flask to his lips. He grimaced, coughed once, then again. His hand shook. He stumbled, knocking the lantern from the table. It crashed, oil spilling, fire licking across the floor. Elijah burst through the door, knife in hand. Calhoun's eyes widened as flames leapt around him. He reached for his whip, but his fingers faltered, slick with sweat. Elijah lunged. The knife flashed, slicing the air. The overseer staggered back, his whiskey-soaked shirt catching flame. The smell of burning flesh filled the cabin. Calhoun shrieked, stumbling through the doorway, his body ablaze. His scream cut across the storm, high and raw. The yard erupted. Men surged from the shadows, blades raised. Women pulled children into corners, their eyes wide with terror. Ruth Ann's song twisted into a cry, sharp and urgent. Isaiah swung his chain link like a weapon, striking a patroller's face. The man fell, blood spilling across the mud. Hector roared, his blade biting deep into another. The storm swallowed. The sounds of battle, but the screams pierced through. From the house, lights flared. Soldiers stationed on the plantation spilled into the yard, rifles glinting in the rain. Shots rang out, sparks against the dark. A boy fell, clutching his chest, his cry drowned in thunder. "Hold!" Elijah shouted. But the chaos had no master. Daniel dropped to his knees, wailing prayers. "Lord, save us! Lord, save us!" He crawled toward the soldiers, arms raised, his words turned to betrayal. "They're here, in the quarters." Elijah's eyes blazed with fury. "Traitor!" He lunged, but the soldiers fired first. Daniel's body crumpled into the mud, his wooden cross splintering beside him. Ruth Ann sang louder, her voice cutting through terror. She stood in the doorway of the quarters, locket clutched, her song rising as fire spread. Flames licked the walls, smoke curling into the night. Children cried, pulled away by trembling hands. Still she sang, her voice cracking but unbroken. Inside the house, Sarah Bellamy pressed her face against the window. She saw Elijah fighting, his knife flashing in the storm. Her ribbon, once hidden in his pocket, now burned in the fire that consumed the yard. Tears streaked her cheeks as soldiers dragged her back from the glass. Jonah Miller ran into the storm, ink-stained hands gripping his Bible. He shouted, "Stop! Stop this madness!" But his words drowned under thunder and screams. He saw Isaiah strike again, saw Elijah's knife plunge into a soldier's chest, saw Ruth Ann silhouetted by fire. His lips trembled. Dear God, the blaze spread. Flames devoured the overseer's cabin, leapt to the edge of the quarters. Smoke choked the air, sparks seared skin. Men coughed, stumbled, but still fought. Blood soaked the mud, mixing with rain with ash. Isaiah pulled at Elijah's arm. "We have to run." "Not yet," Elijah roared, slashing at another soldier. His breath came ragged, his strength fading. Blood stained his shirt, but his eyes burned with refusal. Ruth Ann's song wavered. Smoke filled her lungs. She staggered, clutching the doorframe, still singing. Her voice cracked, broke, then rose again. Children screamed as flames engulfed the shack. Elijah turned, horror seizing his face. "Ruth Ann, get out!" She shook her head, tears streaking her soot-stained face. Her song turned into a final cry. Defiance carried on fire. The roof collapsed. Her voice vanished in the roar of flames. Isaiah dragged at Elijah's arm again. "Please, brother, now." Elijah hesitated, his knife dripping, his chest heaving. He looked once at the burning quarters, once at the bodies scattered across the mud. Then he seized Isaiah's hand. Together they ran into the storm, swallowed by darkness and rain. Behind them, the plantation burned. Flames licked the sky, chains clattered on the ground, and screams bled into silence. The quarters, once prison, now pyre. And through the smoke, through the storm, the dead began their haunting. Morning came heavy with smoke. The fields, once green with cotton, lay blackened and wet. The quarters smoldered, charred beams jutting like broken bones against the sky. The overseer's cabin was gone entirely, reduced to ash. The house stood scarred but unbroken, its white, paint streaked with soot. The air stank of iron and ruin. Crows circled above, their cries sharp and mocking. Survivors were dragged into the yard, wrists bound in rope, faces streaked with blood and ash. Elijah and Isaiah were nowhere to be seen. Mary Ellen's dress was burned at the hem, her eyes hollow but defiant. Hector's chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, his body bruised and bloodied. Children clung to their mothers, silent in shock. The soldiers marched them into line, boots stamped through mud slick with blood, bayonets gleamed. Captain Ransom, the militia officer called to suppress the fire, paced before them. His voice was cold. Who led this? His eyes swept across the line. Which of you dared strike white men in their sleep? Speak, or you'll all hang. No one answered. The silence pressed heavy. Smoke curled from the ruins, rising like a prayer that went unanswered. Mary Ellen lifted her chin. You'll kill us either way. The captain's hand cracked across her face. She fell to her knees, blood at her lip. But her eyes never dropped. Daniel Ross's body lay not far away, sprawled where he'd fallen in the night. His cross lay, shattered in the mud. The soldiers ignored him. His betrayal had bought him nothing. From the house, Sarah Bellamy appeared, pale and trembling. Her father held her wrist tight. He hissed low, "You saw nothing. You speak nothing. Do you understand?" She nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the bound figures in the yard, toward Mary Ellen, whose swollen face still carried pride. Jonah Miller stood at the edge of the chaos, hat in hand. His Bible hung limp at his side. He tried to speak, his voice cracking. Spare them? They were driven. Captain Ransom cut him off with a glare. Driven or not, rebellion must bleed or it will rise again. The trials began 2 days later, held in a crude barn hastily cleared. The judges sat on crates, wigs crooked, robes damp with heat. No juries, no lawyers, just accusation and verdict. The prisoners were dragged in chains, one by one. First came Hector. He staggered, chest heaving. The judge barely raised his eyes. "You struck down 2 men. Hector's laugh was ragged. "And I'd strike more given the chance." The gavel fell. "Death." Mary Ellen followed. They whispered of poison of the overseer's flask. She stood silent, chin high. "Did you lace his drink?" Her answer came steady. "I laced his soul with fear." Gasps rippled. The gavel struck. Death. Others came, trembling, some begging, some silent. None were spared. The militia wanted blood, not truth. Outside, gallows were built, the wood fresh cut, the rope new and stiff. The town gathered, Men with cigars, women with parasols, children perched on shoulders, laughter mingled with dread. The condemned were marched through the crowd, chains clanking, bare feet raw against dirt. Mothers carried babies on their hips, forced to watch fathers bound for death. Soldiers shoved them forward, jeers cutting, like knives. At the foot of the gallows, Jonah Miller raised his voice. "Have mercy. This is not justice, it is slaughter," Captain Ransom sneered. "Stand aside, preacher, or you'll hang beside them." Jonah's hand shook around his Bible. He stepped back, voice breaking. "God sees." One by one, the ropes tightened. One by one, the trapdoors fell. Bodies swung in the sun, shadows long against the earth. Mary Ellen was last. She climbed the steps with steady feet, chains rattling like music. At the top, she turned to the crowd, her voice rang clear. "You burn our homes, you bind our bodies, but you will never chain our souls." The noose slipped around her neck. The crowd hissed. Children covered their eyes. The trap dropped. Her body jerked once, then stilled. Silence fell heavy. Only the creak of rope and the caw of crows broke it. Elijah and Isaiah were still missing. Rumors spread that they'd fled into the swamps, that they lived on as shadows in the trees. Some whispered they were dead already, bones hidden beneath the marsh. Others swore they saw figures at night, torches flickering, voices chanting low. Sarah Bellamy kept her ribbon locked in a drawer, stained with ash. She touched it at night, tears wetting her pillow. She dreamed of Elijah's eyes, of the fire, in the yard, of the way he fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. Jonah Miller's sermons changed. His voice lost its certainty. He spoke less of obedience, more of judgment. The elders frowned. Some stopped attending. But the younger folk listened closer, their eyes sharp. Captain Ransom received praise, medals, and land. He drank more than before. At night, he woke sweating, hearing Ruth Ann's song. Because though the gallows were silent, the song remained. Women hummed it under their breath as they worked the fields. Children whispered it while rocking in the dark. The melody carried across rivers, across towns, across years. Ruth Ann's voice had not died in the fire. It haunted. It lingered. It warned. And somewhere in the swamps where no soldier dared walk, chains clinked in the night. Some said it was only wind rattling branches. Others swore it was the sound of fugitives sharpening blades. The uprising had been crushed, but the memory of fire could not be drowned. The ashes spoke. Years passed. The land healed on the surface, green shoots pushing through the blackened soil. The White House was repainted, its scorched beams replaced. New overseers came, new chains were clasped. Life seemed to return to order. But beneath the soil, the ashes still breathed. The uprising was spoken of only in whispers. The planters called it a riot, a crime, never daring to name it for what it was: rebellion. To them it had been an infection cut out before it spread. To the enslaved it was memory, painful, bloody, but alive. Mary Ellen's name lingered longest. Women murmured her defiant words when overseers passed. "You burn our homes, you bind our bodies, but you will never chain our souls." Mothers whispered it to daughters as they braided hair by candlelight. Fathers muttered it as they sharpened hoes in the dark. Elijah and Isaiah became legend. Some said they reached the north, guided by hidden hands and secret roads. Others swore they lived in the swamps, ghosts of vengeance waiting with knives and fire. Children dared one another to step too far into the marsh, listening for chains that clinked like whispers in the dark. Jonah Miller, broken by what he'd seen, grew into an old man who preached not obedience, but warning. His voice trembled from the pulpit. God does not close his eyes forever. Blood cries from the ground. Some mocked him, others listened. But the younger ones remembered. Captain Ransom never escaped the night. His medals gathered dust. His glass never emptied. He drank to silence the echoes. The song Ruth Ann had sung, the faces on the gallows, Mary Ellen's unyielding eyes. The war he feared came anyway, sweeping over the land like the fire he thought he had crushed. And when the cannons thundered years later, he whispered in the dark, "It was always coming." The legacy of the rebellion could not be buried. It lived in songs hummed low. It lived in scars carried by children who had watched their parents hang. It lived in letters and court records written by men who tried to make it seem small. But the truth was larger than their ink. Because rebellion does not vanish with the rope. It lingers. It waits. It teaches the next generation how to fight. The gallows had fallen silent, but the fields still remembered the fire. And so, in the dark corners of history, when the wind howls through the trees and the earth smells of smoke, you can still hear it. Chains rattling, feet running through the night, a voice singing soft, unbroken, a warning, a promise. The ashes never cooled. This was the story of a rebellion buried in blood, but not forgotten. You have been listening to The Slave Resistance, where the shadows of history are dragged into the light, and where every chain tells a story.